somewhere in your body, right now, sitting quietly inside cells you've never thought about, there is a message from a species that no longer exists. It didn't come from a fossil. It didn't come from a museum. It came from an ancestor, a real one, someone who lived, who breathed cold air in an ice age forest, who was not quite human in the way we usually mean that word, and who had a child with someone who was. For most of the last century, that sentence would have gotten you laughed out of a university lecture hall. Neanderthals were the other branch, the dead end. The species we replaced, not the species we merged with. That was the story for over 100 years. It turned out to be wrong. And the way we found out is one of the strangest detective stories in modern science. This is about what happened when two kinds of human met and what they left behind in us. Let's start with what Neanderthals actually were, because the popular image is mostly nonsense, not the hunched, grunting brute from old textbook illustrations. Neanderthals had brains slightly larger than ours on average. They made tools with real precision. They controlled fire, treated wounds, buried their dead with what looks very much like ceremony. In a cave in Iraq, pollen found near a Neanderthal. Skeleton once suggested flowers had been placed in the grave. That particular detail is now disputed by some researchers. The pollen may have blown in naturally. But the burial itself wasn't in question. They buried their own. They lived across Europe and Western Asia for over 300,000 years, adapting to ice ages that would have killed most of us within a season. And then, somewhere between about 40,000 and 50,000 years ago, depending on the region, they disappeared. For a long time, the assumption was simple. Modern humans arrived. Neanderthals went extinct. Two species, one outcome. The question nobody could answer with certainty was what happened in between. Did we fight them, outcompete them for food, or did something quieter happen, something that doesn't show up cleanly in a fossil record made of broken bones and stone tools? The answer was sitting in our DNA the entire time. We just didn't have the tools to read it yet. In 2010, a geneticist named Svante Pääbo published something that took years of work most people will never appreciate the difficulty of. He sequenced a Neanderthal genome. Not from a living cell, Neanderthals had been gone for tens of thousands of years, but from fragments of DNA preserved in bone, degraded, contaminated, broken into pieces a few dozen letters long, recovered from caves in Croatia and elsewhere. Reconstructing a genome from that is a little like trying to rebuild a burned library using only the ash. Pääbo's team did it anyway, piecing together billions of base pairs from material that had been sitting in the ground since before the last ice age ended. And then they compared it to us. What they found became one of the most cited results in modern genetics, and Pääbo would go on to win the Nobel Prize for it. People with ancestry outside Africa carry somewhere between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA. Not as a metaphor, not as a loose genetic kinship the way all humans share DNA with chimpanzees or mice. Actual, specific, traceable segments of Neanderthal genome sitting inside the chromosomes of people alive today. The number sounds small until you understand what it actually means. It means at some point, a Neanderthal and a modern human had a child together, and that child survived, and that child had children of their own, and so on for roughly 2,000 generations, all the way down to whoever's voice you're hearing this in right now and whoever is listening to it. Here's where it gets specific, because somewhere outside Africa isn't a place or a time. The genetic evidence points to the interbreeding happening primarily in the Middle East, somewhere around 50,000 to 60,000 years ago. As modern humans migrated out of Africa and into territory, Neanderthals had already occupied for hundreds of thousands of years. This wasn't a single encounter. The genetic signal looks like it came from multiple separate events, possibly across different populations and different time periods, As waves of modern humans moved into Eurasia and crossed paths with Neanderthal groups already living there, some researchers have found evidence suggesting interbreeding happened more than once, in more than one place, as different human populations expanded into Neanderthal territory at different times. And it wasn't only Neanderthals. In a cave in Siberia called Denisova, researchers found a different archaic human population, now called Denisovans, known almost entirely from a handful of bone fragments and teeth. We have barely any idea what they looked like. We know they existed almost entirely because of DNA, and modern humans interbred with them too. Populations in Melanesia and parts of Asia today carry up to 4 to 6% Denisovan ancestry. In 2018, researchers analyzing a single bone fragment from that same cave found something almost unbelievable. The bone belonged to a girl who lived roughly 90,000 years ago. Her mother was Neanderthal. Her father was Denisovan. Not a hybrid population, not a distant mixed ancestry showing up generations later. A first-generation child of two different archaic human species found in the same cave where both groups apparently crossed paths. Researchers nicknamed her Denny. She is, as far as we currently know, the only direct evidence ever found of two distinct ancient human species having a child together, identified from the actual physical remains of that child. So the meeting itself is no longer in question. The deeper question is what it actually looked like, and this is where the science gets less certain and more human. We don't know if these were peaceful encounters or violent ones. We don't know if Neanderthal and modern human groups lived alongside each other for generations, trading, intermarrying, building some kind of relationship across the difference between them. Or whether what happened was something closer to conquest, with surviving DNA being the only trace left of encounters that were anything but gentle. The genetics themselves offer one strange clue. When researchers looked closely at the inherited Neanderthal DNA in modern humans, they found something asymmetrical. Modern humans carry Neanderthal DNA on their regular chromosomes, but almost none of it appears on the Y chromosome, the one passed exclusively from father to son. And none has ever been found in human mitochondrial DNA, which is passed exclusively from mother to child. That pattern suggests something specific. It suggests that Neanderthal fathers and modern human mothers produced children, whose lineages continued. But the reverse pairing, modern human fathers and Neanderthal mothers, left a much fainter trace, if any trace at all. One explanation researchers have proposed involves something called Haldane's rule, a pattern seen across many species where two closely related groups interbreed. When hybrid offspring occur, it's often the offspring of one particular sex pairing that struggles to reproduce, sometimes due to infertility. If something similar was happening between Neanderthals and modern humans, it could explain why one direction of ancestry survived into the deep future and the other appears to have quietly vanished. We are looking at the echo of relationships that happened 50,000 years ago. And the only language left to describe them is statistical asymmetry in a genome. It is a strange kind of intimacy to reconstruct. In 2002, in a valley in Portugal called Lagar Velho, archaeologists found the skeleton of a child, buried around 24,500 years ago, roughly 4,000 years after Neanderthals were thought to have already vanished from the region entirely. The child's skeleton showed an unusual mix of features. Some elements matched modern humans closely, others, the proportions of the limbs, certain features of the jaw, looked distinctly Neanderthal. The researchers who studied the remains argued the child showed signs of mixed ancestry, possibly a descendant of interbreeding that had occurred generations earlier. The interpretation remains debated. Some scientists argue the unusual features fall within the range of normal variation for early, modern humans and don't require a hybrid explanation at all. But a more striking case came in 2015. From a cave in Romania called Oase, a jawbone, now known as Oase 1, belonged to a modern human who lived around 40,000 years ago, one of the earliest modern humans ever found in Europe. When researchers sequenced his DNA, they found something extraordinary. Between 6 and 9% of his genome was Neanderthal. For comparison, that's roughly 5 to 10 times higher than the amount carried by people today. The pattern of his Neanderthal DNA wasn't scattered evenly through his genome, the way it is in modern populations after thousands of years of dilution across his generations. It came in long, intact, unbroken chunks. Geneticists can use the length of those chunks almost like a clock. Long, unbroken segments mean the Neanderthal ancestor was recent. Short, fragmented segments mean many generations have passed, breaking the DNA into smaller pieces with each new generation, through a process called recombination. Based on the size of those segments, researchers calculated that this man had a Neanderthal ancestor within the last 4 to 6 generations, not a distant prehistoric lineage, a great-great-grandparent or close to it. Somewhere in his immediate family tree, within living memory by the standards of a human lifespan, was someone who was not entirely human in the way we define that word today. We don't know his name. We don't know hers. We know almost nothing about what their lives were like, what their relationship was, whether it was loving or violent, or something in between that doesn't translate cleanly across 50,000 years. We know they existed because a man who lived and died in a cave in Romania carried the unmistakable, unbroken evidence of it in his bones. What's stranger still is what the Neanderthal genes actually do. They are not idle leftovers, sitting silently in the background of the human genome doing nothing. Some of them are actively, measurably shaping people alive today. Certain Neanderthal-derived genes are linked to skin pigmentation and hair, color in some populations, likely an inherited adaptation suited to the lower sunlight of higher latitudes. Neanderthals had been living in for hundreds of thousands of years before modern humans arrived. Others affect how fat is metabolized and stored. A 2020 study found that a Neanderthal inherited gene variant on chromosome 3 significantly increases the risk of severe illness from COVID-19, a virus that did not exist for tens of thousands of years after the gene first appeared in the human population. Other inherited Neanderthal variants have been linked to differences in pain sensitivity, mood regulation, and risk of certain autoimmune conditions. Some of the immune system genes inherited from Neanderthals appear to have actually helped early modern humans. Neanderthals had lived in Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years before modern humans arrived there. In that time, their immune systems had already adapted to local pathogens that African-originated modern humans had never encountered. Some researchers believe that inheriting certain Neanderthal immune genes gave early modern human populations in Eurasia a genuine survival advantage against diseases their own immune systems weren't prepared for. In other words, the same encounter that may have involved violence, displacement, and the eventual disappearance of an entire human species also left behind something that helped the survivors live. The inheritance isn't simple. It isn't a clean story of loss or gift. It's both, tangled together in strands of DNA that don't carry any memory of intention, only outcome. There's a quieter detail in all of this that's easy to miss, and it might be the part worth sitting with the longest. The human genome carries what scientists sometimes call deserts, long stretches where Neanderthal DNA is almost completely absent in every modern human studied. Entire regions of certain chromosomes, conspicuously empty of any Neanderthal contribution. One particularly large desert sits on the X chromosome. Researchers believe this isn't random. It suggests that whatever genetic material Neanderthals contributed in those regions was actively harmful or reduced fertility and hybrid offspring, and was selected out of the population over thousands of generations. The way evolution quietly edits out what doesn't work. So the genome we carry isn't simply a leftover mixture. It's the surviving result of a filtering process that played out over tens of thousands of years as hybrid descendants lived, reproduced, or didn't, and their children did the same, generation after generation, until what was left was only the portion of that ancient inheritance that turned out to be compatible with continuing to exist. Every person alive today carrying Neanderthal DNA is carrying the part of that ancient meeting that survived selection. Not all of it, just what worked. We still don't fully know why Neanderthals disappeared, while modern humans didn't. Climate change, competition for resources, smaller population sizes that made them more vulnerable to extinction, interbreeding itself, diluting a shrinking population into the larger one. Most researchers now think it was likely some combination of all of it, not one single cause. But disappeared might be the wrong word for what actually happened. At least genetically, Neanderthals as a distinct population stopped existing. Their lineage, in the strict sense, ended. But something of them didn't end. It dispersed. It moved into another population entirely, and it kept going, carried forward inside people who had no idea they were carrying it, for tens of thousands of years, until a research team with a sequencing machine and a few fragments of ancient bone finally noticed it was there. There is something genuinely strange about sitting with that. For most of the last century, we told ourselves a clean story. There was us, and there was them, and then there was only us. The truth that DNA forced us to accept is messier and somehow more intimate than that. There was never a clean line. There were people, of more than one kind, who met each other in the cold of an Ice Age world, who in some cases were afraid of each other and in some cases were not, who had children together whose names we will never know and whose lives we can only infer from chemistry. We don't know if those relationships were chosen. We don't know what they meant to the people involved, whether there was tenderness in any of it or only survival, or something that doesn't map onto either of those words, the way we understand them now. The science can tell us that it happened, repeatedly, across thousands of years and multiple regions. It cannot tell us what it felt like to be there. What it can tell us is this: if you trace your own ancestry back far enough, past every name you'll ever know, past every record that was ever written down, there is a point where the line doesn't lead to another modern human at all. It leads somewhere else, to someone who belonged to a species that no longer exists, who lived an entire life under a sky we'd barely recognize, and who is, in some very real and very physical sense, still here. Still part of the chemistry that makes you who you are. Not a metaphor, not a myth, a measurable, sequenced, scientifically confirmed fact, sitting quietly in cells throughout your body right now, waiting for nothing in particular. It was never going anywhere. It already arrived 50,000 years ago, and it just never left.